Yeah. That's it then.
I'm tired. Anyone? Thank you.
What exclusively has been explained by closing government. Under closing government, we already explained to you on how we as a minority group cannot focus on too many issues, because understanding that our resource is limited to begin with, that means we need to allocate the money to actually issues that is more important to begin with. Because understanding that fighting against stigma, against positive stigma that have been there for decades, need decades as well to actually being solved to begin with. We say that under closing government, we cannot sacrifice those much money to actually only focusing on this kind of thing, where other issues must be solved as well, such as raising more awareness toward the minority discrimination, for example, and other things. Yes, because understanding that the cost is actually that's expensive, that means we cannot actually to focus to many of issues, because the allocation in itself cannot be to the full extent, cannot be focused on a certain thing where the effectivity in itself cannot be there at the end of the day. So several responses to what closing government try to bring, right? The first thing that the closing opposition try to say that, hey, people can be emotional over everything. Yes, exactly, because it is true. We cannot add all more issues for people to be emotional and disrupts the movement on focusing on 600 many issues at the once, ladies and gentlemen. Because people can be emotional, that means we need to actually focus on a certain issues that is far more important that rather than fighting against this kind of positive myth that has been exist for a decade to begin with. But the next thing that closing opposition bans try to bring is that fighting negative stereotype cannot go hand in hand with fighting hand in hand with positive stereotype. But what they say is that if we actually seen as this kind of Asian is very this smart, that means we are job stealer to begin with. I mean, this rhetoric is actually still exists anyway, regardless we embrace this kind of thing to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Sure. So we say that it is very exclusive to begin with. But we say that it will be much better under our set, because we embracing this kind of positive trait will actually make society sees us as a positive human being as well to begin with. At the very least, under closing government, we explain to you on how we as the minority group can have the chance to actually improve ourselves, because we embrace this kind of positive trait. For example, without the existence of this kind of positive trait, when black people seen as gang head, as the head of a gang, for example, so on and so forth, those black people will those stereotypes will actually be used to actually fight against us, to actually reject us from education. Like for example, if black people try to go to education, they are being rejected because they say, hey, you are violent just like other black people. But because of this positive trait that we are embraced to begin with, that we are good at physical, for example, this kind of positive stigma can actually be we can actually use this kind of thing to actually tools for us to actually become more accepted by our own society. For example, being accepted for education because we are given to join athletic, for example, and other things. No, thank you. But under closing government, they also explain on how even if the stigma in itself is not actually fulfilled, the positive stigma in itself is not actually fulfilled. We said that under our set, at the very least, there is interaction from the society in and of itself. But why it is very likely to begin with? Because understanding that at the very least, when we are seen, we have positive that we are embraced instead of fighting to begin with, at the very least, those society can actually see us as a fellow human being to begin with. And at the end of the day, those people is comfortable to actually talk with us. For example, I'm not comfortable talking to if we not actually embrace this kind of positive trait and actually against this kind of thing, those people will actually not comfortable talking to black people because they think that black people is actually violent at the head of the gang, for example, and other thing. But because the existence of this positive trait that we are embraced to begin with, this society will actually, at the very least, feel comfortable to talk with, where we can actually clarify that we are not like for example, that we are different from the majority of the general majority of those people to begin with, right? But third thing, that opposition always push us, say to us that, hey, these people will not be accepted in the in this movement to begin with, that have a different skill to begin with. First, we believe that these people still accepted at the end of the day. Why? Because understanding that embracing and what they said about this is ideal Asian, this is ideal African American, doesn't mean that we are forced these people to be this ideal to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. We say that as minority group to begin with, we are not forced those people to actually become this ideal, but they are still accepted toward our movement to begin with. But even under there said that some of these people that feel that actually I'm not fulfilling an ideal Asian, for example, this minority movement can still say that, yeah, sure, you are not, for example, that sure you are not ideal, for example, and other thing, but you are still Asian as based on your identity. Before I continue, closing.
If the view of job stealer exists anyway, there is no benefit defending positive stereotype. This debate needs to operate that the repercussion, both positive and negative, of positive stereotypes will decrease to some extent on our side.
To understanding that under closing government, we already explained to you that the cost of not doing this kind of thing, the opportunity cost that if we are not actually embracing this kind of thing, we're embracing this kind of thing to begin with, where the issue that we focus too much on the other issues, that means that we are spending a lot of resources to begin with to actually focus on something that is not important to begin with, like ladies and gentlemen. That means that under closing opposition or even opening opposition, the issues that being embraced and being fight again is actually not the issues that are important, and not focusing on those certain issues. Because understanding that if under their side we are fighting against this kind of statement that exists for decades, that means number one, it is very hard to begin with. Secondly, the focus of the society's majority will actually focus on this certain thing rather than focusing on other thing. Because understanding that this stigma exists for a long time and society believed to begin with. If we fighting against this kind of stigma, against this kind of thing to begin with, that means the focus of the society will go to the certain thing that is actually relatable for them, toward them, and it's actually has been happening for decades, for example. But rather under closing government, where we actually embrace this kind of thing, that means we actually just embracing this kind of thing to begin with. That means we actually can allocate more on something that is far more important, because we don't need to deal with something that is actually very hard to fight against to begin with, and something that has exists for decades that can attract to many people if we fight against it to begin with. So why closing government should take CTV? At the very least, we are the only team that can explain what is the opportunity cost to begin with, and why this kind of thing is very important to begin with, to create interaction that can lead toward more acceptance to begin with. We're very proud to focus.